For as long as I can remember, my family had a favorite story about me. It wasn't a kind one. My name is Clara Whitmore. I'm 30 years old. For 22 years, my parents told anyone who'd listen that I was the difficult one, the slow one, the one who'd never quite manage. My sister Josephine, meanwhile, collected Oxford degrees and inheritance, promises like other people collect stamps. She was toasted at dinner parties, invited into every business conversation, paid handsomely for work she barely glanced at. I was paid a fraction of her salary, excluded from family decisions, and mocked. Yes, mocked. At the Christmas table for the way my brain processed written words differently from everyone else's. But on Josephine's graduation evening at the Savoy Hotel, in front of 340 guests, a stranger in a gray suit crossed a gilded ballroom and pressed an envelope into my hands, and everything my parents had ever told the world about me began to unravel. What they didn't know, what they had never once suspected, was that my grandmother had been watching all along. She had seen every dismissal, every quiet humiliation, every dinner table joke made at my expense. And before she died, she had left me something. Something that would turn the entire Whitmore empire upside down. The Whitmores were old money. Not the flashy, nouveau riche kind, but the quieter, more suffocating sort. The kind whose name appeared on university library wings and hospital wards. My father, Edmund Whitmore, ran Whitmore Property Group, a commercial real estate firm my grandmother, Eleanor, had built from a single rented office in Salford in 1967. By 2023, the company was valued at just under £78 million. It had weathered recessions, property crashes, and the slow churn of market change. Eleanor had built it with patience and precision over 4 decades. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed at 8. Letters on a page would shift and swim, rearranging themselves into strange configurations that took me 3 times longer to decode than my classmates. A simple paragraph would demand from me the concentration other children spent on entire chapters. My parents' response to this wasn't support. It was shame. When I was 13, they enrolled Josephine in private tutoring for her A-levels, hired a specialist music teacher for her cello lessons, and arranged weekly sessions with a Oxbridge preparation coach, who charged £450 an hour. When I asked about getting additional help for my reading, my mother, Patricia, tilted her head and released a soft, theatrical sigh. Clara, we've already seen so many specialists. At some point, darling, we have to accept that different children are simply suited to different things. I was 13 years old. I believed her. So I adapted on my own. Audiobooks became my salvation, the library app on my phone, worn headphones on the bus, voices in my ear making sense of things the page refused to give me. I developed a system of diagrams and visual maps, flowcharts I drew in cheap spiral notebooks, that let me understand information the way other people understood sentences. And every Sunday, I'd take the train from our family home in Cheshire to my grandmother Eleanor's flat in Didsbury, where she'd sit with me for hours, explaining the world through stories instead of textbooks. Clara, she told me once, her weathered hand pressing warm over mine, you read slower than most, but you see things others miss entirely. That's not a weakness, sweetheart. That's a different kind of intelligence altogether. I didn't fully understand what she meant. I would eventually. But first, I had to survive another 19 years of being the Whitmore family's embarrassing footnote. Christmas 2019. 22 relatives gathered around the mahogany dining table in my parents' 4-story townhouse in Alderley Edge. Candlelight glittering off crystal. Catered food from a Michelin-starred chef. The annual performance of Whitmore family excellence. My father stood at the head of the table with his wine glass raised, wearing the kind of easy authority that comes from never once doubting your own worth. I'd like to make an announcement, he said, his boardroom voice settling over the room. Josephine has been accepted to read law at Oxford. Full scholarship. The room erupted. Applause. Cheers. My Uncle Richard clapped Josephine on the shoulder so hard her wine nearly spilled. Aunt Catherine pressed a napkin to her eyes as though something deeply moving had occurred. My eldest daughter, Edmund continued, beaming, will be the first Whitmore to read law at Oxford in 3 generations. She is going to take this family and this company to extraordinary heights. More applause. Josephine accepted it with practiced, glowing modesty. Then my father's gaze drifted down the length of the table to me. And Clara. He paused. The warmth evaporated so quickly it might never have existed. Well, Clara is also here. A ripple of laughter moved around the table. Soft, uncomfortable. The kind of sound people make when they don't know what else to do. Josephine didn't defend me. She laughed along with them, her eyes bright and certain. I stared at my plate. The lamb blurred through tears I absolutely refused to shed. Under the table, a hand found mine, thin fingers, papery skin. Grandmother Eleanor, seated beside me, squeezed gently. When I looked up, her eyes held something ferocious, something that looked almost like fury aimed directly at her own son. She said nothing. Not then. But 3 months later, she telephoned and asked me to come to Didsbury. Said she needed to show me something important. I didn't know it yet, but that Christmas dinner, that moment of casual, cheerful cruelty in front of 22 witnesses, had set something in motion. Something that would take 4 years to finally detonate. After graduating from the University of Manchester in 2022. Not Oxford, never Oxford. I applied for a position at Whitmore Property Group. I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to show my family that the business could be my path too, that I had something to offer. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. Salary, £38,000 a year. That same month, Josephine joined as head of legal. Her salary, $260,000 plus quarterly bonuses. My role consisted of photocopying documents, booking meeting rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who had never once learned my name. I was not invited to a single meeting. I was not shown a single contract. I was not introduced to a single client. But I watched, and I listened. During those long, quiet hours in the print room, I discovered something about myself that I hadn't expected. I could spot patterns. When executives discussed deals in the corridor, I'd sketch relationship diagrams in the margins of my notepad, the connections between parties, the flow of capital, the pressure points in a negotiation. A skill I'd developed as a teenager to survive my dyslexia had quietly become something far more useful. Eleanor had first shown me this was possible during those Sunday afternoons in her Didsbury flat, back when she'd spread old contracts across her kitchen table, yellowed pages from the company's earliest years, and walked me through how to read them. Not word by word, but as systems, as living structures. Your father reads contracts like a prosecutor, she'd told me in 2020, just as her health was beginning its slow decline. He looks for what he can exploit. You read them the way an architect reads blueprints. You see how all the pieces hold each other up. That same afternoon, she'd handed me a small box made of dark walnut wood with brass hinges. "Keep this safe," she said. "Don't open it yet, you'll know when." I took the box home, tucked it in the back of my wardrobe, and tried not to think too hard about the strange, quiet weight of her words. March 2020. Eleanor's flat in Didsbury. She was 83 then. Her frame had grown smaller than I remembered, thinner, more delicate against the high-backed armchair she'd always favored. But her eyes, those sharp, knowing eyes, had lost nothing. "Sit down, Clara." I sat in the chair across from her, in the living room where I'd spent so many Sunday afternoons. The walls were covered in photographs, Eleanor breaking ground on her first Salford property in 1967. Eleanor shaking hands with the Lord Mayor of Manchester. Eleanor accepting a Women in Business Award in 1989. Framed certificates, civic honors, a life built from nothing. Not a single photograph of my father at the helm. "I built Whitmore Property Group from nothing," she said. "One office, one assistant, 55 years of work." She paused, and something complicated flickered across her face. "Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. He doesn't understand what it means to create something from nothing. Grandma, he judges people by their credentials, by their degrees, by how they perform in a room full of other people performing." She leaned forward. "I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And Clara, You are the only person in this family who has ever been genuinely kind without expecting anything in return. She pressed the walnut box into my hands. There's something inside that may help you one day. But not yet. You're not ready, and neither is Edmund. Her grip tightened around my fingers. When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do with it. I wanted to ask what she meant, what was inside, why she'd chosen me. But she changed the subject. The weather, her neighbor's garden, the novel she was reading. And so I let it go. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice in Sale. I was the only family member at her bedside. The box remained unopened in my wardrobe. April 2023. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon just after lunch. Subject: Position restructuring. Confidential, dear Ms. Whitmore. As part of our ongoing operational review, your current position will be made redundant effective 1st September 2023. HR will be in touch regarding statutory redundancy and notice arrangements. I read it 3 times. The letters swam, arranged, settled back into the same devastating message. They were letting me go. That evening, I stayed late in the office, sorting files that no one would ever look at again. Through the thin partition wall between my desk and my father's corner office, I heard voices, Edmund and Patricia. "We can't have her here when Josephine takes over," my father was saying. Low, measured, matter of fact. "It looks poor." The CEO's sister working as an administrative assistant. "People will ask questions." "What sort of questions?" My mother's voice. "Why she isn't in leadership. Why we haven't promoted her. Why she's the way she is." A pause. "We've done everything we could for her, Edmund," my mother said very softly. "Some children simply don't have what it takes." Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a decent redundancy package. She'll find something more appropriate elsewhere. I pressed my palm flat against the partition wall. £38,000 a year. My one-bedroom flat in Levenshulme had cost £920 a month since my last lease renewal. No savings, no safety net. If I lost this job, I'd be in serious trouble within 3 months. But the money wasn't what turned my chest to stone. It was something else. A realization settling into my bones like a Manchester winter. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life as the family failure. Not because I had failed, but because I had never once been given the room to succeed. Josephine's graduation event was tomorrow. I found myself wondering what other announcements my father had planned for the evening. 14th May 2023. The Savoy Hotel. The Lancaster Ballroom. 340 guests filled the room. Business associates, property investors, solicitors from the city's most established firms, extended family members I barely recognized. The kind of event that cost more per head than my monthly take-home wage. This was Edmund Whitmore's stage. The place where he performed his role as patriarch, as operator, as the man who had constructed a life of effortless dominance. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the hem of my dress, navy blue. £65 from Other Stories. The nicest thing I owned. Everyone around me gleamed in designer gowns and bespoke suits. My mother found me before I'd taken 10 steps. "Clara." Patricia's gaze moved from my shoes to my face, with the unhurried precision of someone cataloging a disappointing purchase. "You couldn't find anything more appropriate than that?" "This is what I have, Mum." Her fingers adjusted the clasp on her bracelet. "You'll be at table 29, near the back by the service door. Try not to call attention to yourself." She lowered her voice. "Tonight is Josephine's evening. Whatever feelings you think you're entitled to, keep them to yourself. Don't embarrass us." She was gone before I could speak. Table 29 was half hidden behind a structural pillar. My tablemates were distant cousins I'd met twice at funerals. From where I sat, I could just see the main stage. The enormous framed portrait of Josephine in her Oxford gown. The banner reading "Congratulations, Josephine Whitmore, Oxford Law, Class of 2023. And near the entrance, standing alone by the door, a silver-haired man in a charcoal suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't drinking, simply watching. His gaze moved across the room until it found mine. Something cold moved down the back of my neck. At 8:30, the orchestra paused. The lights softened. A spotlight fell on the stage where my father stood, champagne flute raised. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. The applause started before he finished the sentence. Josephine graduated in the top 3% of her year at Oxford Law. She completed a prestigious pupillage in Chambers, and last month she was offered a position on the partnership track at one of London's most distinguished firms, in record time. Gerald's voice swelled. But tonight, I'm not merely celebrating her achievements. I'm announcing her future. Josephine joined him on stage, luminous in deep emerald. Effect immediately, Josephine Whitmore will inherit my entire estate upon my passing, including the family residence in Alderley Edge, currently valued at £9.4 million, our holiday property in the Cotswolds, and most importantly, he paused, savoring it, the position of Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Property Group upon my retirement. The room erupted. Standing ovation, camera flashes. Josephine touched her eyes with elegant, practiced grace, 340 people celebrating. Not one of them glanced at table 29. The cousin beside me, a woman I'd met at a funeral 6 years ago, leaned across with the specific cruelty of someone who doesn't realize they're being cruel. Clara, right? So, what does that mean for you? I opened my mouth, closed it. What could I say? That I'd just been formally erased from my own family in front of everyone who mattered? That the redundancy email in my inbox was only the beginning? The applause died. Josephine embraced our father. Cameras clicked, and through the crowd, the silver-haired man by the door began walking toward me, slowly, deliberately. As though he'd been waiting for exactly this moment, he stopped at table 29. Up close, I could see he was older than I'd first thought. Early 60s, with deep-set eyes and the careful, upright posture of someone who'd spent decades in courtrooms. "Miss Whitmore, that's me." I straightened in my chair. "Can I help you?" "My name is Geoffrey Marsh." He produced a business card from his breast pocket, cream-colored, embossed, Hargreaves and Marsh, Solicitors, Manchester. "I was your grandmother's solicitor." My grandmother. The words hit like something physical. "Eleanor passed away 2 years ago." "I'm aware." He didn't sit, didn't soften. "She left something for you, with very specific instructions about when to deliver it." From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, heavy stock, sealed with red wax, a solicitor's notary stamp pressed into the center. "What is this?" "Her will." His voice dropped. "The real one, the one your father doesn't know exists." I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read Hargreaves and Marsh, 15th August 2020, 5 months after that Sunday afternoon in Didsbury. 5 months after she'd given me the walnut box. I don't understand. "Your grandmother gave me precise instructions. I was to deliver this document on the day your father publicly disinherited you." Marsh glanced toward the stage, where Edmund and Josephine were still basking in the room's attention. "I believe that has just occurred." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. "Mr. Marsh, what's in here?" For the first time, something very nearly warm moved through his expression. "Mrs. Eleanor asked me to tell you. Give this to Clara on the day Edmund shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready." He straightened his tie. "I'll be available when you have questions. You have my card." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I couldn't breathe in that ballroom. I pushed through the service entrance and found an empty corridor near the hotel kitchen. Fluorescent strip lights hummed overhead. The sounds of celebration became a muffled drone behind me. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, 3 pages of dense legal text, a notarized signature. A date, 15th August 2020. I read slowly, carefully. The letters shifted and resettled, but I forced them into focus, the way Eleanor had taught me. As a structure, not just words. I, Eleanor Margaret Whitmore, being of sound mind and full capacity, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents, and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes found a paragraph near the middle and stopped. To my granddaughter, Clara Ann Whitmore, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitmore Property Group Limited, currently valued at approximately £40 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again and again, 51%. Controlling interest, the will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Edmund's treatment of Clara. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to any lack of ability, but due to a deliberate absence of support. Clara is not slow. Clara was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to persist after my death. A sob caught hard in my throat. Grandma had seen. She had seen everything. Condition. To activate this bequest, Clara must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void, and all assets shall transfer per my 2016 testament. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at 8:30 p.m. on 17th May. I leaned against the cold wall, the document pressed to my chest. My grandmother had built me a door. Now I had to decide whether I was brave enough to walk through it. Josephine Marsh was waiting near the coat check when I came back through. You read it, the 72-hour clause. My voice cracked slightly. Why would she put that in? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitmore. He handed me a second card. This one with a mobile number written on the back in neat, precise handwriting. She understood that with unlimited time, you'd find every reason not to act. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to revise their opinion of you, to take what is rightfully yours. He checked his watch. The deadline is Thursday evening. If you want to proceed, you'll need to submit a formal request for an emergency board meeting. I can help you draft it. Through the ballroom doors, I could see my father still on the stage, posing for photographs with Josephine. My mother worked the room with practiced elegance, accepting congratulations as though she'd personally earned each one. If I did this, if I invoked the will, I would blow apart every relationship I had left. My parents would never forgive me. Josephine would see it as an act of war, but if I stayed silent, I accepted their verdict. I became exactly what they'd always said I was. The slow one, the failure, the daughter who didn't matter. Miss Whitmore. Marcia's voice cut through the noise in my head. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last years of her life preparing for this moment. The only question remaining is whether you believe in yourself. I looked at the will in my hands, at the elegant, familiar signature of the woman who had held my hand under Christmas tables and shown me how to read the world differently. I'll call you tomorrow morning, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Marsh allowed himself a small, precise smile. She said you would. I want to pause here for just a moment. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in you, if you know what it feels like to be dismissed by the ones who should have been in your corner, I want you to type the word enough in the comments below. Let me know I'm not alone in this. And if you want to see what happened when I walked into that boardroom, keep watching, because we are only just getting started. That night, back in my flat in Levenshulme, I finally opened the walnut box. My flatmate was asleep. The only light came from the amber glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains, throwing orange lines across my bed, where I sat cross-legged with the box in my lap. The brass hinges creaked as I lifted the lid. Inside, a handwritten letter on Eleanor's personal writing paper, a faded document bearing a 1967 date stamp, and a USB drive, small, modern, clearly added years after the other contents. I reached for the letter first. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, Jeffrey has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1967, when I founded Whitmore Property Group with 2 colleagues who have long since passed. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without full board approval. The USB contains something else. Something your father hoped I'd forgotten. In 2019, Edmund proposed a board resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 8%. His stated reason was that I was too elderly to understand modern business practice. His actual reason was control. He wanted it entirely, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. Mine and Margaret Ashworth's. I never forgot what he attempted, and I never forgave him for the way he used you to justify it. As though dismissing you somehow proved I was unfit. As though your quiet struggles reflected poorly on me rather than on him. Use this wisely, Clara, not for revenge. For justice, all my love, Grandma Eleanor plugged the USB into my laptop. The file was labeled Board Meeting Minutes. February 2019. PDF: my father's attempt to strip his own mother of power. Documented, timestamped, evidence. 16th May 2023, 9:15 a.m. Margaret Ashworth answered on the second ring. Clara Whitmore. Her voice carried the unhurried warmth of someone who had lived long enough to stop performing. I've been wondering when you'd ring. You know who I am. Sweetheart, your grandmother and I built half of South Manchester together in the late 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, not long before she passed. I gripped my phone. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Margaret's tone sharpened. To request an emergency board meeting, you need 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm 1. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. I heard papers shifting in the background. Edmund Whitmore is considerably less popular on that board than he believes himself to be. His management style is, let's call it, strongly directive. At least 3 other members have raised concerns privately. They simply need someone to step forward first. Hope moved through my chest. Who? Philip Cartwright and Diana Osei. Both have been on the receiving end of Edmund's temper behind closed doors. I'll make some calls. A pause. Clara, I need you to understand something before this goes any further. This will not be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They will say terrible things about you. They've been saying terrible things about me my entire life. At least now I'll be in the room when they do it. Margaret laughed. A warm, genuine sound that filled the line. Eleanor always said you had steel underneath all that quiet. I'm beginning to see what she meant. She cleared her throat. I'll have the petition filed by this evening. Board meeting. 17th May, 10 o'clock. Whitmore House, 6th floor. Thank you, Margaret. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're sitting at that table. Edmund found out about the board meeting at 4 o'clock on the 16th. I know this because Josephine called me 40 minutes later, her voice tight and precisely controlled. What have you done? I was at my desk, pretending to update a spreadsheet. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Dad just received notification from the company secretary. Emergency board meeting tomorrow, requested by Margaret Ashworth and 2 other directors. A pause, sharp as broken glass. Margaret Ashworth hasn't requested anything in 12 years. What did you do? Perhaps she has concerns about company direction. Don't play games with me, Clara. Josephine's composure cracked audibly. If you're trying to embarrass us, trying to make some kind of scene, I'm doing my job, Joe. Same as always. She rang off without another word. 19 minutes later, Edmund walked past my desk on his way to his office. He didn't look at me. He didn't acknowledge me. He simply slammed his door hard enough to rattle the windows. Through the partition his voice carried. Ridiculous waste of everyone's time. Margaret's probably going daft. We'll address her concerns and move on. No, I'm not worried. Clara? My God. Miranda, she can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled at my monitor. For the first time in 30 years, being underestimated felt like an extraordinary advantage. That night, I prepared. I printed 3 copies of the will, downloaded the 2019 board minutes onto my phone as backup, wrote a brief statement, not an accusation, simply a presentation of facts. Jeffrey Marsh confirmed he would attend as authenticating solicitor. Margaret texted at 11 p.m. Petition filed. See you tomorrow. She'd be so proud. I barely slept, but for once, the thing keeping me awake wasn't dread. It was anticipation. 17th May 2023. 9:45 a.m. Whitmore House, Manchester. The lift opened onto the 6th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished concrete, expensive art on the walls. The kind of corporate environment designed to make you feel small before you've said a word. I stepped out in a dark blazer I'd borrowed from my flatmate, slightly too wide across the shoulders, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought from a charity shop in Fallowfield for £8. The security guard at the boardroom door held up a hand. Name? Clara Whitmore. He checked his tablet, frowned. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Whitmore Property Group employee with business to present to the board. Miss, this is a restricted. Is there a problem? Josephine's voice behind me. I turned. She looked immaculate. Midnight blue trouser suit, silk blouse, the precise uniform of someone who has never once questioned whether she belongs in a room. Her eyes went to my borrowed blazer, my charity shop portfolio. Clara. Her smile didn't reach anything. What on earth are you doing up here? I have information to present to the board. Information? She produced a light, disbelieving laugh. About what, exactly? You work in the print room. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what EBITDA stands for, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's not especially complicated. Josephine's smile flickered. Before she could recover, Edmund appeared at the far end of the corridor, flanked by two senior executives. He took one look at me, and his face did what it always did, that particular expression, half contempt, half weariness, as though I were a problem that kept rearranging itself. Clara, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually. A voice from inside the boardroom. It does. Margaret Ashworth appeared in the doorway, 74 years old. Silver-haired, standing with the natural authority of someone who had been building companies when Edmund was still at prep school. I invited her. She has standing to address the board. Margaret smiled with complete serenity. Let her in. Edmund's jaw tightened. For one awful moment I thought he might physically block the door. But Margaret Ashworth had been a board member for 31 years. Her standing in that room outweighed his entirely. Fine. My father's voice had gone to ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes. Josephine caught my eye as I passed and mouthed, very clearly, you are embarrassing yourself. I looked at her and said nothing. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined. An oval table of polished walnut. 12 leather chairs in deep charcoal. Portraits of former executives on the walls, including, I noticed, my grandmother Eleanor. Her painted eyes watching from above the fireplace at the far end, with an expression I'd seen in real life 1,000 times. Watchful, assessing, patient. 12 board members settled into their seats, Edmund at the head, Josephine to his right, not yet an official member, but positioned as the obvious heir. I was directed to the chair at the far end. In the corner, Geoffrey Marsh sat with his briefcase open on his knee. He caught my eye and gave a single, small nod. Robert Pendleton, the board chairman, a distinguished man in his mid-60s who'd served on the board since Eleanor's final decade, called the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Margaret Ashworth, Philip Cartwright, and Diana Osey. Margaret, you have the floor. Margaret rose. Thank you, Robert. I'll keep my remarks brief. She gestured toward me. The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light. One that significantly affects the ownership structure of this company. I yield my time to Miss Clara Whitmore. 12 heads turned toward me. Josephine smirked. Edmund leaned back in his chair with theatrical, pointed boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I'd expected them to be. Thank you, Mrs. Ashworth, and thank you to the board for allowing me to speak. I opened my portfolio. What I'm about to present may surprise some of you. I ask only that you allow me to present the evidence before drawing any conclusions. Edmund sighed, loudly, deliberately. I ignored him. Before I could continue, my father raised his hand. Robert, before we waste the board's time. Edmund rose, buttoning his jacket with slow deliberation. I need to provide some context. His voice adopted the patronizing warmth he used with difficult clients. Clara is my daughter. I love her. But she is categorically unqualified to address this board on any matter of business substance. She holds an administrative position. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience whatsoever. Josephine's contribution arrived on cue, wrapped in false sympathy. Clara also has dyslexia. She struggles significantly with reading. We've always tried to support her, but some limitations simply can't be resolved through effort alone. Several board members shifted. What we're witnessing here, Edmund continued, is a young woman acting out following an emotional response to last night's announcement. Sibling dynamics can be. Mr. Whitmore. Robert Pendleton's voice cut across him cleanly. You'll have the opportunity to respond in due course. Miss Whitmore has the floor. Edmund sat. His expression promised consequences. Josephine mouthed something at me from across the table. I chose not to read it. Instead, I looked at them both, my father, my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder and far clearer than anger. They weren't trying to protect me. They weren't even trying to protect the company. They were trying to protect the story. The one where I was nothing. Thank you, Mr. Pendleton. I reached into my portfolio. I won't be discussing my reading today. I'll be discussing this. I placed the will on the table. The room went absolutely silent. That's impossible. Edmund's voice came out strangled. My mother's will was finalized in 2016. I have the documentation. You have a copy of her previous will. I kept my voice level. Clinical. Under the Law of Property Act and the Wills Act, 1837, a valid subsequent will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documents. This will, I placed it at the center of the table, was executed 4 years after the one you possess. I slid it toward Robert Pendleton. Mr. Marsh. I turned to the corner. Would you confirm the authenticity of this document for the board? Geoffrey Marsh rose. Geoffrey Marsh, senior partner at Hargreaves and Marsh Solicitors, Manchester. I served as Eleanor Whitmore's personal solicitor from 2009 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on the 15th of August 2020. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original is held in escrow at a private bank in Manchester city centre. Pendleton studied the document. His eyebrows rose almost imperceptibly. This will bequeaths 51% of Whitmore Property Group shares to. He looked up. To you, Miss Whitmore. Murmurs moved around the table. That's a forgery. Josephine's voice had lost its certainty. It has to be. It is not, Marsh replied immediately. And I'd strongly advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence, Miss Whitmore. Hargreaves and Marsh's professional standing speaks for itself. My mother was being manipulated. Edmund's voice had turned ragged. This lawyer, Marsh, he must have. Grandma Eleanor wrote that 5 months after you attempted to strip her of her board rights. I kept my voice level, precise, because she saw exactly who you were. You didn't lose because I betrayed you. You lost because you betrayed her. Edmund's jaw worked. Perhaps, I continued, you'd like to explain this as well. I pressed play on the recording loaded on my phone. My father's voice filled the boardroom. Eleanor is 82 years old. She doesn't understand modern business practice. I'm moving to reduce her voting rights from 51% to 8%. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording. Edmund's face had gone the color of old putty. That was a private board session, which Eleanor attended. She recorded it, as was her right as majority shareholder. I let that settle for precisely the right number of seconds. The board rejected that resolution by 2 votes, Eleanor's and Margaret Ashworth's. Robert Pendleton set down the will. His expression had shifted from carefully neutral to something considerably harder. Miss Whitmore, would you read the relevant passage aloud? For the record. I nodded. Took a breath. To my granddaughter, Clara Ann Whitmore, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitmore Property Group Limited, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I paused, letting each word find its place. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Edmund's treatment of Clara. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to any lack of ability, but due to a deliberate absence of support. Clara is not slow. Clara was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to persist after my death. Miranda made a small, strangled sound. I looked directly at my father. Edmund said nothing. His hands, I noticed, were trembling on the arms of his chair. The will concludes, Edmund has confused credentials with character and degrees with worth. He attempted to strip me of my rights because I refused to be managed by him. He marginalized Clara because she reminded him daily of the kind of person he has chosen not to be. I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Clara. Robert Pendleton removed his reading glasses. Mr. Marsh, you can confirm this document is legally binding and supersedes all prior wills? I can. The 2016 will is superseded. As of this moment, Clara Whitmore is the majority shareholder of Whitmore Property Group. Margaret Ashworth allowed herself a very quiet smile. And for the first time in my 30 years on this earth, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This proves nothing, Josephine said. But her voice had gone brittle. Even if the will stands, which we will contest, Clara has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. I address the full board now. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I drew the February 2019 board minutes from my portfolio. On the 14th of February 2019, Edmund Whitmore proposed Resolution 2019-04 to reduce Eleanor Whitmore's voting shares from 51% to 8%. His stated rationale. I found the passage. The founder is no longer capable of engaging with modern business operations. That was taken entirely out of context. Edmund's voice. The resolution failed by 2 votes. Eleanor's and Margaret Ashworth's. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor telephoned me that same evening. She was heartbroken, not because the resolution had failed, she knew it would, but because her own son had tried to take everything she'd ever built. This is ancient history, Edmund started. It is evidence. I cut him off with the quiet certainty of someone who has nothing left to lose. Evidence that my grandmother was not suffering diminished capacity when she wrote the 2020 will. She was a woman protecting herself from her own son. And protecting me. Robert Pendleton looked around the table. Does anyone have documentation contradicting what has been presented? Silence. Edmund's jaw moved. No words came. Josephine stared at the surface of the table. All of it, the performance of confidence, the armor of certainty, had cracked. Philip Cartwright broke the quiet. Robert, I'd suggest we recess briefly and have our legal team review these documents, agreed. Pendleton checked his watch. 15 minutes. Mr. Marsh, please remain available. 15 minutes became 50. The board's solicitor, a tightly wound man named Harrington, spent the entire interval on his phone with Hargreaves and Marsh, the bank holding the original will in escrow, and Company's house. I sat alone at the far end of the table. Geoffrey Marsh brought me a glass of water without being asked. Margaret rested a hand briefly on my shoulder as she passed. Edmund and Josephine stood in the corridor, their argument growing increasingly urgent and increasingly quiet. When Harrington finally returned, he moved to Pendleton's shoulder and spoke in a low voice. Pendleton's expression moved through several things in quick succession: surprise, confirmation, and finally a kind of resigned resolution. Please take your seats. The board members returned. Our legal counsel has confirmed the following. Pendleton read from his notes. The will presented by Miss Whitmore is valid under English law. It supersedes all prior testamentary documents executed by Eleanor Whitmore. Effective immediately, Clara Ann Whitmore holds 51% of Whitmore Property Group shares. Someone at the far end of the table inhaled sharply. Additionally, as majority shareholder, Miss Whitmore has the right to bring motions before this board, including motions pertaining to executive leadership. Pendleton looked at me directly. Miss Whitmore, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward? I stood. My heart was doing something extraordinary behind my ribs, but my voice held. I have one motion. Edmund rose from his seat. Robert, this is absolutely. Sit down, Edmund. Pendleton's voice was very quiet and completely immovable. Miss Whitmore has the floor. Edmund sat. The color had left his face entirely. I looked around the table. 12 people who 90 minutes ago had never once considered me capable of anything. Now they waited on my decision. The power to end my father's career was right there in my hands. I thought about what Eleanor would want. I thought about who she had raised me to be. And I made my choice. I am not proposing to remove Whitmore as chief executive. The tension in the room rearranged itself. Margaret's eyebrows rose. Even Josephine's head lifted. What I am proposing, I continued, is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Edmund Whitmore retains their confidence as chief executive of this company. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. This is absurd. Josephine stood. You're turning this into a spectacle. A revenge fantasy. No. I met her eyes steadily. This is corporate governance. The same process that exists in every well-run company. The same process Grandma Eleanor wrote into our bylaws 35 years ago. I paused. If my father has the board's confidence, he has nothing at all to worry about. Robert Pendleton studied me for a long, measured moment. Then something shifted very quietly in his expression. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded. Margaret didn't hesitate. Then we'll vote. All those expressing confidence in Edmund Whitmore as chief executive, please indicate. 4 hands went up. Edmund's allies, people whose board positions he had personally recommended. All those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. Pendleton counted once. Counted again. Set down his pen. The motion carries. 7-4 with 1 abstention. He turned to my father. Mr. Whitmore, the board has voted no confidence. Per Section 12 of our Articles of Association, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Edmund said nothing. He stood, looked at the portrait of his mother above the fireplace, looked at the table, and then, finally, he looked at me, really looked at me. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I expected rage. Threats. The cold fury I'd grown up afraid of, what I saw instead was something worse. Recognition. The slow, terrible understanding that he had underestimated me so completely, for so long, that he had lost everything because of it. He left without a word. I want to pause here for just a moment. Some of you are probably asking, why not simply remove him outright? Why offer any chance at all? Because revenge isn't justice. Because destroying someone doesn't undo what they did to you. And because my grandmother didn't raise me to be cruel. She raised me to be fair, if that means something to you. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the story isn't finished yet, not even nearly. Edmund caught me in the corridor outside the boardroom as the other members were filing out. Patricia was with him. Someone had called her during the recess. Her mascara had tracked down both cheeks. You. My father's voice was barely controlled. Edmund. Patricia put a hand on his arm. Not here. She just dismantled this family in front of 12 people. I didn't dismantle anything, I said. I told the truth. The truth? Edmund laughed. A brittle, hollow sound. Your grandmother was an old woman who was taken advantage of. That solicitor, Marsh. Grandma Eleanor wrote that will 5 months after you tried to take her voting rights, because she saw exactly who you were. You didn't lose because I went against you, Dad. You lost because you went against her. Patricia stepped forward. Clara, sweetheart, you have to understand. We were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. We didn't want to place expectations on you that you couldn't. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 28 years of silence resolved into words. Cleanly, without drama. Simply true. Every Christmas dinner. Every family photograph. Every conversation about Josephine's achievements in which you remembered, almost as an afterthought, that I also existed. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. That's not. You're right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair for a single day of it. I met my mother's eyes. I spent my whole life trying to earn a place in this family. I'm done earning. The documents say what they say. Edmund grabbed my arm. This isn't over. We'll contest that will. I pulled free. You'll lose, and you know you'll lose. Because Eleanor anticipated every argument, including this one. I walked to the lift. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Clara, wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The lift doors closed on my parents' faces. I leaned against the brushed steel wall and finally let myself breathe. The adrenaline that had carried me through the previous 2.5 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its place. Not triumph. Not vindication grief. I had just cut off 28 years of quietly hoping things would change. Of believing that if I was patient enough, good enough, quiet enough, my parents would eventually see me. Love me the way they loved Josephine. That hope was dead now. I had done it myself. The lift descended 6 floors. By the time I reached the lobby, I'd wiped my face and straightened my borrowed blazer. Jeffrey Marsh was waiting at the security desk. He searched carefully for the right word. Quite something. It was necessary. Your grandmother would agree. He fell into step beside me as I moved toward the entrance. What happens now? I go home. I sleep. I try to work out what my life looks like now. I stopped at the revolving doors. I don't want to be CEO. I never did. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who genuinely care about it. Marsh nodded slowly. The board will want to speak with you. Transition planning. Your role going forward. I know, but not today. I pushed through the door and felt the Manchester afternoon hit my face. Gray sky, cold air, a distant smell of rain coming. Today I just need to be Clara Whitmore. Not a shareholder. Not a victim. Not anyone's symbol. I looked back at Whitmore House. 8 stories of glass and pale stone, my family's name above the entrance. Tomorrow, I said quietly, I start building something new. 19th May 2023. Edmund Whitmore signed his resignation letter at 3:45 p.m. I wasn't there. I learned about it through an email from Robert Pendleton. Miss Whitmore, your father has tendered his resignation, effective 16th June 2023. The board has appointed me as interim chief executive while we undertake a formal leadership search. Additionally, the board has voted to offer you a position as strategic advisor to the board, reflecting your standing as majority shareholder. This would allow you to participate meaningfully in major decisions while you determine your long-term relationship with the company. I hope you'll consider it. Regards. Robert Pendleton read it 3 times, habit, then forwarded it to Marsh for review. His response arrived within the hour. Fair offer. No complications. Well done, Clara. That evening, a company-wide email went out to the Whitmore Property Group team. Effective 16th June, Edmund Whitmore will step down as chief executive. Robert Pendleton will serve as interim CEO. The board also welcomes Clara Whitmore as strategic advisor in her capacity as majority shareholder. We thank Edmund for his service and wish him well. My phone filled with messages. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for over a year. People who had never once learned my full name. Suddenly wanted to catch up. To have coffee. To reconnect. I ignored most of them. But one message stopped me. Patricia Morales, the executive assistant who'd been with the company since 1988, who'd worked directly with Eleanor during her final years as an active director. Clara. Eleanor used to talk about you. She said you saw things others missed. I never understood what she meant until yesterday. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. I saved that one. Some of the validation you needed most doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's precisely why it matters more. A week later, the story went public. Northern Business Review. Whitmore Property Group leadership shakeup. Founder's granddaughter takes controlling interest after secret will surfaces. The article used no names directly. Privacy considerations prevented that. But anyone in Manchester's property world knew exactly who it was about. In a dramatic shift at one of the Northwest's most established property firms, a previously overlooked family member has emerged as majority shareholder following the discovery of a subsequent will. Sources close to the board describe the transition as long overdue and cite sustained concerns about the previous CEO's management style over recent years. Edmund and Patricia canceled their appearance at a charity dinner in aid of a Manchester hospital wing. Health reasons, according to their statement. 3 investment partners requested meetings with me personally. Not with the board, not with Pendleton. With me, Two of them, after extended conversations, confirmed they would continue their relationship with Whitmore Property Group without hesitation. "We've had reservations about Edmund's approach for several years," one told me quietly. "Eleanor built something remarkable here. It's reassuring to see her vision protected." The social ripple effects spread outward. Friends of my parents found prior engagements. Invitations to charity events thinned. The Whitmore name, which had once opened every room in Cheshire, now carried a different weight. I didn't celebrate their humiliation. But I didn't mourn it either. Margaret called me on a Saturday morning, 3 weeks later. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly, I'm not entirely sure yet. Ask me again in 6 months." "Fair enough." A pause. "Eleanor would have handled it exactly the same way, you know." The vote of confidence rather than simply removing him. Giving him a chance he hadn't earned. She laughed softly. "She always said that mercy was the most powerful move available to anyone." I thought about that for a long time after we rang off. Mercy wasn't weakness. Mercy was choice. And for the first time in my life, the choice had been mine. 10th June 2023. My phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. "Clara." My mother's voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Careful." "Reduced." "Could we talk?" "Just the two of us." We met at a cafe in the northern quarter. Neutral ground. No chance of Edmund arriving with a solicitor. Patricia was already there when I came through the door. She looked older somehow, in a way that had nothing to do with years. The precise, maintained composure had slipped. She held a coffee she hadn't touched. "Thank you for coming." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "I know I've no right to ask it." "What do you want, Mum?" "To apologize." The word came out cracked at the edges. For everything, for the things we said, for the things we never said, for every Christmas table and every conversation where you didn't exist to us. I looked at her. "Are you apologizing because you're genuinely sorry, or because everything has changed?" She flinched. The question sat between us like something solid. "Both," she said finally. Her eyes filled. "I'm ashamed to admit that, but both. I told myself I was protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. I told myself that so I wouldn't have to feel what I was actually doing. You let Dad diminish me in front of family, in front of business partners. You never said a word. I know." A tear moved down her cheek. "I know, and I can't undo any of it. But Clara, I don't want to lose you entirely. I know I may not deserve the chance, but I had to try." I looked at this woman who had been my mother for 30 years, who had plaited my hair as a small child and stopped knowing my middle name as an adult. "I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen," I said slowly, "but I'm willing to try building something new, something honest." She nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. August 2023, 3 months later. Josephine called while I was walking along the canal path in Castlefield, watching the afternoon light on the water. I almost didn't answer. "Clara." A beat. "I know I have no right to ask this, but can we meet? There's something I need to say to you." We sat on a bench outside a cafe in the Arndale Quarter on a gray Wednesday afternoon. Josephine looked different. The armor she'd worn her entire life, that polished, unassailable certainty, had cracked through completely. Dark shadows under her eyes, hair pulled back without care. "I've been in therapy," she said without preamble, "since June. 3 times a week. That's good. It's brutal." She attempted a dry laugh. "Turns out being the golden child isn't a gift. It's a different kind of trap." I waited. Dad expected perfection from me every single day. Every grade, every accolade, every award. It was never an achievement. It was just the minimum required for whatever came next. She stared at her coffee. "And the way they treated you." I told myself it was simply how things were, that you were different, that staying quiet was the same as not being involved. She finally looked at me. "I was protecting myself. If I'd ever defended you, I'd have become a target. I knew that, and I chose not to find out. I know. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened." Her voice cracked. "I just want you to know I see you now. I actually see you. And I'm genuinely sorry I didn't look sooner." We sat in silence for a while, two sisters who had grown up in the same house as strangers to each other. "I can't pretend nothing happened," I said finally. "But I'm not interested in staying enemies either." Maybe we start from nothing. Build something real. Josephine's eyes filled. I'd like that very much. It wasn't the sisterhood I'd wanted when we were children. But perhaps it could become something true. November 2023. 6 months after the board meeting. I moved into my own flat in Coralton, a proper one-bedroom, Victorian conversion, a bay window overlooking the kind of quiet residential street where people walk dogs and nod good morning. The rent was more than I'd ever spent on myself. But I could afford it now. My new role at Whitmore Property Group, Director of Sustainable Development. Salary, £168,000, plus dividends on my shares. The title was my idea. A new division focused on green building practices, environmental impact assessments, low-carbon retrofit programs for existing stock. The kind of forward-thinking work Eleanor would have championed if she'd lived to see the urgency of it. Edmund called once a month now. Brief, polite conversations. The weather, my new flat, how the division was developing. We both performed a version of normality and pretended the past existed in another life. It was easier that way. Patricia and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person rather than a problem she'd failed to solve. It wasn't the mother-daughter relationship I'd imagined as a child, but it was honest, and honesty was more than we'd ever managed before. Josephine and I had coffee on weekend mornings sometimes, walking through Heaton Park or along the Salford Quays waterfront, finding our way into a conversation that was actually ours. She told me about the pressures she'd carried alone for 30 years. I told her about the loneliness. Neither of us pretended the past was acceptable. But we were writing something new. On the wall of my flat, I'd hung a framed photograph of Eleanor. Not the boardroom portrait, a smaller one, personal. Her sitting in the garden of her Didsbury flat, laughing at something off-camera. The afternoon light on her face made her look younger than her years. Sometimes, in the evenings when the lamp threw warm shadows across the room, I'd look at it and speak to her in my mind. You did it, Grandma. You gave me the tools. I just had to be brave enough to use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible in a company that bore my family's name. Now I was finally, fully, irrevocably myself. Looking back from here, I understand something I couldn't have seen at 28. Eleanor didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was superior to Josephine. She left it to me because she knew, with the precision of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading people, that I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. She knew because she'd watched me, week after week, Sunday after Sunday, and seen how I treated people who had nothing to offer me in return. Dyslexia is not my flaw. It is simply part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns where other people see noise. The qualities that made me appear slow in my parents' eyes were the very same qualities that allowed me to see truth clearly when everyone else had looked away. Edmund judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance in rooms full of other people performing. Eleanor judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way someone treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth, not by what my parents decided, not by what my sister achieved, not by what anyone who doesn't know me thinks, by my own measure, my own truth, my own standard. If you're watching this and you recognize something of yourself in this story, if you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to much, I want you to hear something. You don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who have decided, for their own reasons, not yours, that they will never offer it. Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They let you decide who gets access to your life and on what terms. My family hurt me for nearly 3 decades, but I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I simply needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself instead. That is the real inheritance my grandmother left me, the one that was mine all along, and no one, no boardroom, no inheritance dispute, no family tribunal can ever take it away. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that your worth is not decided by the people who failed to recognize it, I want to hear from you. Subscribe. Ring the bell. Leave a comment and tell me your story. Thank you for being here with Serene Drama Stories. Thank you for listening. Until next time.